Hey everybody, welcome to the Matt Report. As always, I'm your host, Matt. This is the #1 WordPress business podcast in the universe ever created, ever will be created. It's just the best, right? If you haven't heard us yet, where the heck have you been? mattreport.com/subscribe, join the mailing list, and if you want to become a pro member, mattreport.com/join. And become a member and help others and have others help you grow your WordPress business. Today, we are joined by world famous entrepreneur of WordPress, Jake Goldman. Jake, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I like that your show is universe, best in the universe, but at least I have the world.
Right. Yeah. See, people know me on Mars, but they just don't know you yet. Speaking of, this show is going to take an accelerated pace right past Jake as a young WordPress person and go right into the sixth gear of where he's at today, because I feel that most folks know who Jake is. If you don't, you're going to learn a whole heck of a lot about him. So Jake, I'm going to open this up with a quote. Quoting you actually.
This could be dangerous.
Yeah, this is going to be dangerous. I feel like I can be a lot more, I don't want to say, on the offensive, because I don't do that at the show, but I think we can have a little bit more fun, you and I. Owning a company of 10 upscale of up to 60 people is the wildest emotional roller coaster one can ever experience. At any moment, it can be the most thrilling or nausea-inducing experience there is. Imagine you're the roller coaster conductor, not just the passenger, and every day the ride is different. Wear a strong seatbelt. Don't forget to appreciate how special and exhilarating it always is. And remember that every lift, dip, and calm stretch is just a moment, not the whole ride. Sunglasses, feeling rough. Jake Goldman on Facebook. So Jake, you have one of the largest privately held WordPress agencies. Can you give us some insight to that emotion and what this roller coaster ride is like for you?
Sure. My first piece of advice to all budding entrepreneurs is don't forget to check your Facebook friends. Sure. I mean, I think I think anyone that's been in an entrepreneurial position, you don't have to have 60 people to feel it, right? I'm sure you feel it, Matt. I know you and I have spoken. As you said, we're friends that go back before WordPress podcasts and before the world famous, right, could be associated with us. I think that. I think there's a few dimensions to that sort of reflection, right? The reality is, in any given week, when you have 60 people, and I think most people, if having this candid conversation, most people know when you've had a company now for a few years, right? Some degree of churn, right, is inevitable, right? When you have 60 people and they've been around for a while, right? You're going to have some people that come, some people that are ready to do something new, right? You're going to have new products going out the door. You're going to have things that didn't work, right, and that you want to shut down and move on from. So, I think the sense that I was trying to express is that there's some weeks where you just have so much. It can be. I mean, if just being open, right? There's some weeks where those highs and lows, just you have to be able to step back from it. Remember that those are all just moments. I mean, to in 1 week be able to launch our first fully owned product and be really excited about it, right? One day it can be you're on top of the world and it's the greatest moments ever, and then the next day you're having a hard conversation with a client, you're having a hard conversation, right, that you don't really enjoy, with a member of your team, and it's a humbling experience, and it's also, I guess, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every day it is a challenge, and it's one of those things where you're always as open as we all are, quote, on the web. Running a business is always scary because you're always afraid to hit publish. You're always afraid to ship that version of code, and as a business owner, you're afraid of the reflection that has on your company, on your team, and then all the stresses of running a business and providing for that team and making sure that you live up to be the leader that you aspire to be, and hopefully keep inspiring your team. Let's talk directly about the business. You've seen some fascinating growth over a quote relatively short amount of time over the last few years. On the more technical level, is 10up completely bootstrapped, or do you have any kind of investors?
100% bootstrapped.
That's awesome. And to go from 0 to literally 60, or nearly 60,
Yeah.
what has that ride been like, in terms of your day-to-day, like Jake Goldman, the developer, to Jake Goldman, the business owner? You already kind of reflected on it, but what were the biggest challenges you faced outside of development and building a product, but just human resources, management, growth, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act. I mean, the hardest thing that I still have to do, in fact, if anything, it maybe gets harder, right? Except that I have less, I don't have to multitask and worry about doing engineering as much, right? As we get larger, though I like to stay a little bit attached to that. I think like for me, the act of being able to do this bootstrapped, right, is you have to keep in a harmony, which is ultimately a lot of guesswork, right? How many people you're going to need, right, in 2-3 months, how much work you need to keep them busy, right? And I think the points where we've had the largest growing pains, right, because you don't go through this kind of growth, especially in this period of time, and not have growing pains, is when those forecasts, those educated guesses are often one direction or the other, right? Especially on the sales side, right? I mean, you've been in sales both in WordPress and I think which really helps you as a business person beyond WordPress, right? Like in other marketplaces, right? So you know that when you're trying to grow a company, you're selling to a broad variety of customers. You're maintaining a certain large pipeline, right, of deals, sort of statistically how much you think you need to keep yourself busy. You can sometimes have months, and lucky for us, we've had few of these, where it's way off the average below, right? You can have a month where you think you've got some prime deals lined up and just the stars don't align. We're very lucky in that hasn't happened that often, but you can also have the other problem, right, where you say maybe our close rate of the deals we really want is 20% or 30%, right? And then you just have a month where you're on top of it, right? And now you've closed 60, 70% of that business, and as the old expression goes, congratulations, you got the work. I'm sorry, you've got to get it done.
Yeah.
Right now. So I think our biggest growing pains have always been when I don't quite hit on the nail on the head in terms of how much we have to plan to do. Right, and those are the nights and those are the months where I have to really, I have to go the extra mile, and I'm giving up a lot of, free time and evenings and weekends on recruiting or, and staffing and, ramping that up a little bit.
So is your day-to-day today still, is it the outside sales? Is it the business development? Is that the core focus that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, I mean, my focus is admittedly pretty spread thin. I'm lucky enough that if once a month for a few hours I get to actually get my hands in code. I don't want to get too far away from what it means to actually understand our craft at the ground level, although I'm not. There are people that are much sharper on the team than I am. Most of my day-to-day now, it's probably a quarter business development. It's probably a quarter talent development and recruiting and and generally personnel management and growth. Probably a quarter back-end sort of CEO operations of the company, everything from legal to contractual to frankly, managing, again, employment, and employee issues, all the way to the last. I guess in the last quarter, honestly, is whatever between servicing over 80 customers and working with 60 people that just bubbles up.
Mm. Take us back to the earlier days of 10up, when you were still in Providence and you and I were still hanging out at meetups. What was the balance like, or how did you get through the balance of the highs and the lows? So for the smaller boutique agencies that are out there, or the freelancer who's looking to finally either partner with a developer or bring somebody on full time, what was your strategy? So you're out there selling, and then you've got a 6-month pipeline, but then that pipeline starts to dry up. How did you balance that? What did you do to work through that to keep on scaling?
Sure, I guess I can offer a few insights there. And I think, I've said this before in other public settings, I didn't wake up one morning and have some brilliant, embedded insight that somebody else didn't have. I was very fortunate that before I started 10up to have spent the last 7 or 8 years in leadership roles in different agencies, right, in different consultancies, right? So I had an appreciation and an understanding for what it meant, right, to grow things. So a few things I would offer, right? One, it is critical if you want to grow a company that you're not just thinking about, especially in web development, you're not just thinking about in and out projects, right? That you're thinking about from the beginning. Is this project a project I'm going to work on for a month and then go away, or is this project that has long-term potential? Is this a customer that can be my customer with a steady stream of work for years, right? And retainers and ongoing agreements, and even the ones that you don't know if they'll become, right, ongoing agreements. building a relationship with that customer so it does become that, right? Those recurring revenue streams are critical, right? Like the notion of 60 people, right, is a lot more scary, right? If somebody's thinking I've got to sell 60 people's worth of work every 6 months, right? That's not what it is. Overwhelmingly, most of our revenue is in long-term relationships, right, and long-term ongoing customers. Second piece of feedback that I offer to an audience like yours is take the time. If you don't understand sort of the accounting and the math, right, and the finance side of business on your own, find a mentor or a partner or a friend that does understand that, because I had when I was first looking at a while ago what it would mean to start my own business. In one case, before I even had as much agency leadership experience and was thinking about it, I had a friend that was a CFO at a larger company that sat me down, and I feel like an idiot having gone to business school that he needed to do this, but he really showed me the math, right? And it's stunning to a lot of developers, right, especially the ones that are effectively and successfully consulting in WordPress, to look at the math and understand that, for example, if you're positioning yourself where you can charge, a good, reasonable going rate, right, in this ecosystem, if you can even book half your time, right, just half your time, just 20 hours a week, and give that to somebody that you hire and somebody that you give the stability, right, of a job that pays for that person, and that pays for some of you as well, and has freed you up to go pursue more work. So I think understanding like the math and the finance, which is very eye-opening to some people, and having understood that was a big part of it. The last piece of it, I sound like it's like I'm being cliche here, but I'll say it anyways. It is hard work, right? It is just understanding that when to go from 1 to 2 pretty much means you're going to have to do 1.5 people's worth of work, right, before you can add that next person. Right, to go from 2 to 3 means the 2 of you are probably going to have to do 1.25 people's work before you want to add the next person.
Yeah. Will Reynolds of Sear Media, which is a larger SEO firm, and he actually did the CEO swap with Rand Fishkin of SEO Moz. That's what he said. I mean, he says when you hire somebody else, especially in the early days, like hell, even maybe employees 1 through 10, every time you take on that next employee in that range, you're back to eating ramen noodles, because one, it's the money crunch, cash flow, but you're always maxing out. You're always revving out a little bit more of yourself until you can actually justify taking it on. It is hard work, and that's a lot of that's the biggest lesson that folks are just have their blinders on too sometimes, because I think in this startup tech world, it's always like, yeah, make a Flappy Bird, $50,000 a day.
The jackpot.
Yeah.
Right. Like everybody can be Gravity Forms, right?
Right. Everybody can be Gravity Forms, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And the truth is, right? Like, a lot of people, what's popular and what's successful, which is not necessarily a bad thing, we like to talk about, right? We like to focus on. And for some companies that have high costs of doing business that are not in labor, right, it makes sense to take on investment, right, which can create a little bit of I think a little bit of a skewed perspective as compared to how agencies should be developed. Now, unless you're a business person, right, that just doesn't know anything about sort of the technology that you're servicing, there's no, from my perspective, I think there's very little reason for agency services to need to take investment at the beginning. There might be some small amount of either reaching into your own pocket if you have some savings or someone close to you, just to get, to know that you can pay for yourself, right, for some number of months, while you get yourself off the ground. But beyond that, I mean, especially with the number of contractors out there, you don't have to hire right away, right? You can start with, engaging freelancers. I mean, every unit, if you're doing it right, almost every unit of work you do, right, should have income coming in with it, right? It's not like a product where you have to have a 24/7 support, a massive national product where you have to have like a 24/7 support team and pay for a lot of servers, right, and pay for a lot of, costs of doing business and overhead where you need that investment.
Right. I want to get to picking the right freelancers early on, which then hopefully transitions into a full-time employee. But before we get there, should the folks in the audience be focusing on finding the right client that you're going to have an extended relationship with? And if so, how do you either vet those types of customers, and what kind of services are you offering that's ongoing? Are you looking for people that have big projects that this is a big project, so I'm going to be on a retainer for at least a year, or is it more service stuff that you get into? Any insight to that?
So it's a little bit of both, I guess. So, I mean, speaking for where we are now, we have everything from large customers that just have continuous development needs, right? They're always adding new features, rolling out campaigns, right? They're always trying. I mean, for many of our customers, I mean, their website is their medium, right? It is the core in many ways of their business, right? So just like, just like any other company, they want to be constantly improving it and constantly staying ahead. Sometimes it's customers that are themselves growing and adding new properties, right? And adding new, if it's a like a magazine, right, that they're adding new specials, right, that they're adding new columnists, right, and they need support for all of them. There's another half of that question I missed. In terms of like getting started, like I guess you were alluding to like what do you ask at the beginning early on?
Yeah, I mean, like some folks will be like, hey, so you get a referral from your mom's neighbor's cousin and they need a website for their restaurant. Like, that they're not going to have the budget, and you won't be coming back to you quite often unless it's like updating their menu, but is there another...
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously at the very beginning, right, when you're just making a name for yourself, you have to what I call do your time, right? You have to do your time with those kind of customers to build a portfolio, to build cred, and you shouldn't be ashamed of doing your time in serving those kind of customers. I think at some point you have to ask yourself, and it's partly a what do you want to do, what do you want your business to be question, right? You have to ask yourself whether you want to build something, right, larger than yourself, or whether there's nothing wrong with that, whether you're happy sort of just being a free agent and being, taking on those kind of regular projects. If you want to grow beyond sort of yourself and maybe one partner, you have to be asking yourself, what the path is, for that customer. Like how do you build work that you don't have to worry about being a recurring series of revenue, right, to pay for other employees all the time, right? Nothing will put your mind more at ease for growing your company than knowing that you've built a relationship with somebody that's going to have that's going to pay for some cost of somebody else to work with you for an ongoing period of time without having to lift, too many fingers.
Has your definition of that path changed since hiring employee number 2 to hiring employee 50-something that you're at now?
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, we are everything from our rate, right, to our expectation of what's enough work to justify it being ongoing has certainly gone up.
Has your vision changed at all? Like where you kind of felt you would be in a few years, for better or for worse?
My instinctual answer is no. I mean, it tweaks, it expands, it gets adjusted, right? The core of 10up's vision, the core of 10up's mission, right, is to make web publishing and content management simple and fun. Right? I mean, from the earliest versions of the website, if you go back and look in the Wayback Machine, our About Us page talks about the idea that content management sucks for a lot of people, right, historically, and we think that not only can that not suck, right, but that done the right way might even be a fun experience to manage websites. So I think we've always stayed true to that vision, right, and that belief system. And now as we get larger and as we have more bandwidth to do new things, products become a part of that vision, right? Like design has become increasingly important to that vision beyond engineering. We've added things like monetization strategy, right, to that vision, but it's still very much around that nuclear core.
Nice. Going back to finding that employee number 2 or partnering with a great freelancer, I attended one of your talks at WordCamp Boston, where you had your top 10 questions for vetting a freelancer or an employee, as it were. So for somebody bringing on a partner or somebody in a small boutique agency, how important is this vetting process? Aside from the typical, like references and, the typical sort of, I guess, human resources side of it, how important is this vetting process for WordPress developers, to you and to others?
I mean, it's critical. I mean, an agency is its people, right? Like an agency, fundamentally, what you're selling, I've said this elsewhere, right? Fundamentally, what you're selling is a team, right? Like, we're not the only ones that know how to make a website, right? There's plenty of companies that if you think of the product just as making a website, that can do that, right? What makes your company different than another company, as much as all of us, I'm sure there's plenty of owners that would like to think it's all them, right? That makes a difference, and it's all the time that they've spent writing culture messages and value messages, right? The truth is that what makes a company what it is, what makes a company succeed is its team, right? And its people. If you don't have the right people, nothing will sink you faster than having the wrong people. Nothing will make you soar faster. And 10up's been very lucky in this respect than having the best people. So, I mean, a lot of my time spent on vetting. We take a fairly small percentage, right, of the people that are introduced to us that come to our door. I think my number one responsibility in terms of the health of the company is making sure we have good people, right, and making sure that our team stays strong.
I think what was the last statistic I saw? I think 1 out of 5 Americans are employed by 10up. No, not
maybe 1 out of 5 states has 10up.
Yeah, not that high, but I mean, so you don't take on everybody. I mean, do you have? One would imagine you'd have lots of folks knocking on the door. Recently, in the think tank episode from Troy Dean, you guys kind of spoke about, hey, look, like we're not even looking at WordPress developers. We're looking for PHP, Java. How important is it? How important is it to you that they come in with WordPress experience, and do you have a program of leveling up for if they don't know WordPress?
So that's a great question. For sure, our ideal candidate, right, at least for web engineering roles, not necessarily for design or front-end roles, but at least for the web engineering roles, for sure, our ideal candidate has at least some applied experience with WordPress. Now, I will say, so candidates and some of our best employees, right, that come in with maybe very minimal WordPress experience, but some familiarity. We don't have to start on day one from what is WordPress, right, and what is a CMS, right? Come in with very strong underlying theoretical skills, right? So they have like degrees in computer science or a similar field. They have hands-on applied experience with PHP, right, in web technologies and building websites. If you have that theoretical training from a good university, right, in a good school, and you have some applied experience building websites, I think you can pick up WordPress very quickly and very easily. We'll also hire employees that compensate for the lack of theoretical training by having a lot of applied experience with WordPress. It's pretty rare I'll hire somebody that only has applied experience making websites and doesn't have WordPress experience. I'm very happy hiring people that have good theoretical training in skills and leveling them up. I do think that obviously it's an ideal for us. I don't think the field and the marketplace always lends itself to the ideal. I think this is probably a different subject, but I do also, it does inform my philosophy about how we attract the next generation of developers, right, and how we make WordPress appealing, right, to a new generation. Because I will tell you, I have made hard appeals to people that are not, quote, WordPress developers, but simply great developers that I respect and seem to be very talented. And I think some people in our community may be surprised how often I hear, even when I get the foot in the door and get a conversation going, how often I hear just disinterest, right, from great developers that haven't already drank the Kool-Aid.
Disinterest from building on top of WordPress, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, that's really that is interesting. You said that on Think Tank too, about how some of the more elite developers out there are just like, yeah, it's just not interesting. I mean, is it? And I think even you said it's not like you're coding PHP any better than some of the PHP developers. So I mean, do you have? And I get this question coming up, so I'm trying to segue into this. So today I released my interview with Paul Mariana of VP Platform Services at VIP.
Right.
So at the time when we had the discussion, VIP and Automatic hadn't launched their developer training program. I forget the official title, but that's one of the things he and I spoke about. Like, how can we make developers more attracted to this? Their program, I think, is like $900 a seat or something like that. So, what is it like for a business owner who is sort of now competing with the mothership, for lack of a better word, because you're growing so fast, you're looking for talent, they're looking for talent, we're both working on the same software. Would you entertain sending some of your employees to their program to level up, or should we be doing something totally different to attract the developer to go to WordPress?
Sure. So I'm not sure if this is where you're going with the question. The first thing I do want to say is we don't consider Automatic a competitor. We consider them a very strong partner.
Right. Yeah. I don't mean like competing in products, but just getting talent to, if somebody's really talented out there, do I want to work with Automatic? Do I want to work with 10up?
Sure. And I do think that there's still enough talent out there, right, for there to be, enough options for every, for a lot of different players in the space, right? Known names and unknown names in the space. In terms of like what VIP is doing to attract new developers, what Automatic's doing, I mean, I'll take help. I'll take help anywhere, good programs anywhere I can get it. I do think we need more programs. I can tell you that it's very much on my mind that this is a problem. I would love in our future, I don't think we're there yet in terms of devoting our resources to this. I would love for there to be a 10-up school, right? Like, I think there's models for this in other platforms and other CMSs that have been around for longer, where some of the leading shops, right, and some of the leading agencies sort of build training programs. You don't have to be, it serves both incoming employees as well as people that are not within the company. I mean, there's nothing. Most platforms that have not been successful over time, that have had beyond even the popularity of WordPress, have usually failed over time, or in some measure have failed over time due to developer abandonment, right? Due to lack of developers, right? And more often than not, bad implementations, software gets a bad reputation from bad developers, right? And a bad development community that can't serve it. It might not be fair to the underlying platform, but it does tarnish the underlying platform. We see some of that, I think, sometimes with WordPress, right? I mean, the notion that WordPress, for example, is insecure, right, or hackable is just untrue, right, compared to other software. But there are plenty of people that, because WordPress is so approachable, that maybe don't understand some theory behind either security, right, of software, or reliability or best software development practices. And because we take the bazaar, not the cathedral model, right, there's a lot of sites that get hacked, right? And I think we should be wary. We should be wary of having like a Windows-like reputation, right? Windows, a lot of its reputation of like around like Windows Vista and stuff for like instability, a lot of it had to do with bad development, right, on top of the platform. A lot of it had to do with popularity and people targeting it, right? And
the other half of my question with Automatic, you mentioned partnerships and things like that. I'm curious to know, one, this is another loaded question. One, could there ever be will we ever see another 10-up spawn as quickly as you, or grow as fast as you, had you not been so deeply embedded in WordPress from the beginning? Could there be an elite programmer coming from somewhere saying, I'm going to start a WordPress shop and grow it as fast as Jake Goldman, having not been around for so long and carrying the quote-unquote legacy of Jake?
So I want to think about that before I answer it. It's funny. What's echoing in my head is the legacy of Jake's. I think you think there's something more going on there than I do, in terms of repute. I don't actually know the answer to that question. It's a good question. I do think there's plenty of room for another hungry person, right, to come in and and build a great agency. There are great agencies out there that maybe put WordPress less at the center, but use it as their CMS, right, of choice. Some of which are larger, right, than 10-up. Some of which are huge, right, which make WordPress at the center. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's plenty of opportunity to come in and still do amazing things, right, in the agency space, and if that's what you want to do, it's not the only path. If that's what you want to do, build a large team. I think there's no denying that part of our ability to grow quickly and be successful is tied to timing, right? Is tied to, starting 10-up at a moment. I mean, I certainly started 10-up at a moment where I thought there was still a lot of opportunity. WordPress was still at the very beginning of a growth curve, right? And that there was a real opportunity, and with all respect to some of my peers, my friends, a real opening, right, for a shop like 10-up to come in.
Are you still now that you're at that scale? Do you still see growth potential?
Oh, for sure. I mean, growth potential, unquestionably, right? Like, I mean, I think we've added, since we don't tweet about them as much. We don't blog post new hires anymore because our blog was just becoming silly, right? But I think we've added since January, since the start of the year, we've added more people than we hired in our first 2 years, right? Or close to that, maybe a little less than that. If anything, I think we have a choice about about what scale we want to be at. I think we want to keep growing. We want to keep getting larger. We want to be as large as, to me, the number of people is irrelevant. We want to be as large as we can, while that in a way that enables us to be as awesome as we can. Right, at building websites and building web experiences and releasing web projects. I think the percentage of growth will slow down simply because I don't think that, I think we have had 300% year-over-year growth, right, or something. And when you get to 60 people, the idea that we could have in the next year another 120 people here, right, and maintain our quality standards, right, I think is a little overwhelming to think about. Right, so I think we'll slow down the percentage of growth because we want to make sure that new people that come into the company get the training and the support, right, that they need to be successful and can become those next rock stars. But we'll keep growing.
Yeah. Speaking of growth and of course WordPress, what technologies are out there that you're running into as competition or alternatives to what you're offering up, WordPress? Something aside from Drupal, but is there any other platform or software that folks should know about, be kind of gearing up for as they grow to your size, that they might be running into in the negotiation room?
So that's another great question, because I think this actually goes to a debate that's very interesting to me, which is, what is WordPress's purpose, right? What is it intended to be as a platform? If you're like me and you define WordPress's predominant purpose as being a content management and publishing platform that's extensible to add on all kinds of functionality to a predominantly publishing or content management centric experience, I don't think today that there is a better choice right out there for the kind of customers that we serve. If there was, we'd probably be using it as well as WordPress. I think there are sometimes better choices for people that are just want to spend $15 a month, right, and have a more commercial solution, want to set something up quickly. I think we're seeing an interesting trend driven by basically Wall Street valuations of some really huge companies like Vox Media trying to go the proprietary route. Based on, I think, a very fallacious argument about their company's worth and their company's, valuation on the market by having proprietary software stacks.
But they use WordPress now, right? Or
no, a lot of them have built their own proprietary content management systems.
I thought The Verge was powered by WordPress.
I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember offhandedly if The Verge is. I don't think it is, though. But I can tell you that there are other, like Lamb Media and other, who I've talked to leaders there that have gone the proprietary route, right? Huge, $100 millions, right, in revenue publications. That I had a conversation briefly 4 or 5 months ago with the CEO of Glam Media, and he didn't even, I think some of it was just spin, right, but didn't even want to hear it, like, on open source, right? To me, it's nuts, right? Like, to me, it's like, okay, well, why use PHP? Or, like, why not build your own, like, programming language on top of C++ as well? Why not build your own operating system, right, or your own version of, like, PageMaker, right, for your print, publications? To me, it's silly, but they have it in their heads that this proprietary technology stack offers some sort of differentiation, increases their valuation because you're buying a software assets, not just content. So we see that at the very high end. At the very low end, I think things like Tumblr, things like Squarespace will deservedly eat at the people that want to spend $15, $30 a month on a plug-and-play site. And to be honest, that's not a market that particularly interests me, right, or that I care all that much about for our business. I think WordPress, for what we do, is still the best choice. It's why we still invest so much in it, right? It's why we still use it. Yeah. That's why we still use it predominantly. But one last quick thought there. I will say that this is partly why the conversation about, like, WordPress's future should be an app engine, like a framework or programming language, worries me, because I think we have extremely stiff competition, right, and better choices if we just want to be like a set of wrapper functions, right, and dependencies.
Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. But and I agree with you. In the interview that went out today with Paul, I had mentioned at that time that I was on a call with a Fortune 50 company trying to talk to them about a WordPress solution, and the guy, it was a vice president of something that I was talking to, right. And I don't know how many levels of vice presidents this company had, but he just told me straight out. He said, "Look, I'll entertain the call because you were referred to me, but if I even mention WordPress, I'll probably get fired when I get to the boardroom, because they're going to look at me and be like, WordPress, like that it's some free software. We're not going to run this platform on WordPress. So it was very frustrating. And that's actually how I met Paul. Brought him onto the call to try to convince them, but they weren't even having it. So very frustrating when the enterprise, I guess, or the big brand, big media brands like a Vox are saying no to that. But I mean, is that why Silicon Valley doesn't really cover the WordPress stuff, because it's open source and no one is really interested in open source because it's valuations and the bubble?
What do you mean by cover it?
Well, I mean, they'll cover launches, but there's not you're not seeing a lot of tech startup spin or news coming from WordPress. I mean, maybe we're not doing things with a big enough splash.
So if we mean covering like WordPress as a platform, they do cover, right? Some of those big publications do cover major updates to WordPress or to WordPress.com, right? I mean, we think of like TechCrunch and some of these other ones, right? What they're really covering is business news, right? Not platform and software news. And so they do, the ones that cover software news do cover WordPress itself, updates and major news. I do think you're raising a different interesting question, maybe, which is WordPress-centric businesses, right, and startups, why they don't get that coverage. And I'll probably frighten or put off some people in this room when I tell them that when you speak to investors, right, and you speak to people that are looking at product businesses, you will hear over and over again, right, that there's no money, right, in WordPress businesses, right? I mean, I've said on the record that I think the WordPress quote unquote, gold rush is a total myth right here. Now, maybe we have different definitions and investors have different definitions of what a gold rush is, right? And when an investor brings $1 million to the table, right, they want to build a $20 million or $30 million company, right? For some people in the WordPress ecosystem, that has a very freelancer kind of roots. It's very sort of independent. Hippie would be a strong word, right? But has a very sort of like independent streak, right? You can build a decent lifestyle business. You can build a decent modest business, right, on it. You can have a few outliers, like everybody wants to point to gravity forms, right? That hit a central, niche. But I mean, but even even gravity forms or even iThemes, I mean, the scale of these companies that we look at as very successful, right, are blips on the radar of the kind of companies TechCrunch covers, right, and some of these big publications cover. So there's that.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I originally covered the written interview with you for SEO Slides, I submitted it to TechCrunch, sort of as like a WordPress startup investor news thing, and I get nothing. But either way, I'm trying for everybody. One last question from what you're seeing in from your altitude in the WordPress business. Inevitably, large platforms like a Google with changing search algorithms and not being able to see search terms, and Facebook changing ad platforms. How do you see Jetpack impacting our platform in WordPress?
I think Jetpack actually provides a lot of value for a certain class of website, a certain class of bloggers. I mean, what Jetpack at its best, right, what Jetpack solves is the fact that WordPress as a core, install it on anywhere from cheap GoDaddy hosting, right, poor GoDaddy, it's got that brand now, right, everything from cheap GoDaddy hosting to, the most premium hosting that you can find out there, right, because that's its install base, right, the core software can't do some of the crazier stuff, right, that a completely controlled end-to-end infrastructure, like a Squarespace infrastructure all the way to the publishing experience can. You don't know when somebody installs WordPress if they're going to time out, right, after 30 seconds on a script. You don't know if they're going to have a series of dependencies, right, in PHP installed. You can't even reliably know what version of PHP without putting people through the headache of constant requirement changes, right, they're going to run. You don't know how fast the server is going to be. You don't know, what the memory, limits are going to be on that server. So open source compared to commercial solutions can be hamstrung, right, in terms of doing more interesting things. So what Jetpack solves, right, is it takes what you can distribute in an open source product and adds on top of it a layer of services that are controlled through an infrastructure that Matt and Automatic and their investors do control, right, on WordPress.com. So you can do things like CDN, you can do things like lazy loading, you can do things like social, having a having feeds of like for social ingestion into search engines that you can't rely without making the software have much higher dependencies do in open source. So I think it's great that we're giving people that want to run open source software a way to run their own install, own their own content, and get some of those features that you just can't count on putting in open source.
Now that you're getting into product, do you keep an eye on what they offer up through that? Like if, hey, they all of a sudden they come forward with some kind of SEO slide competitor or
push notifications.
Push notifications. What does Jake do? How do you keep your pulse on that? Are you just saying, heads down working and we'll just provide a better product?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I do worry about that, right? Like I do worry about what it means for Jetpack as a 100-pound gorilla, right, to come in and just say, we want to add that feature, right, to our plugin, and they're able to give it away for effectively free, right? Because of the success of WordPress.com, that's not something I really like. If I'm being very candid, that giving away something for free because you have revenue from a different space, right, or you have a different business model, is not something I love. Whether it's Google doing it, right, to a competitor, or whether it's or Apple or any of the other big players, I think our economy in general runs risk very often of big players that have a very different scale and a very different monetization scheme squashing independent innovation. So I do worry about it. The reason I choose to nonetheless invest in this space, right, and contribute to this space is because I think that even if they do, is still a space for a more finely tailored, right, solution that's not sort of the broad one-size-fits-all solution. I also like to think that that Automatic CEO, and that Matt, who is, I consider a friend, and that their board has enough presence of mind in ways that we've seen to understand that it does not serve them to aggravate or push away, right, or destroy the community around them. I mean, Automatic could add consulting services, right, and cut off, right, and be the elephant in the room in that space. They've chosen not to, I think, because they understand that if they do what other platforms like Movable Type have done and cut that arm off of their community, that they're in the long term doing themselves a disservice. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see as Automatic's investors change, as their strategy changes. We'll have to be attuned.
I'm going to jump right to this hot seat question that I had for later on. So, given with what you just said, TenUp just rolled out 2 new products. I think we're going to save directly talking about like the development and promotion and marketing of that product for another show. We're going to touch upon it, but I'm not going to get too deep into it. But you released 2 products. With all the manpower, talent that TenUp has, I was thinking that maybe you guys should be forking WordPress, and I'm serious. I'm serious because the way I see it is, eventually, you will be offering services to somebody who wants to be the Vox, but without the Vox money. But WordPress doesn't do it. So if Skynet all of a sudden took over the world and we had all that stuff happen to WordPress where, hey, now Jetpack is that 100,000-pound gorilla in the room, is TenUp our valiant knight to come out of the dark shadows with its own publishing platform? Go.
Yes, we've started the fork. I'm just kidding. So a few dimensions to that question. First, I mean, the honest and politically correct thing to say is that I think that our team and our core contributors and what we give to WordPress goes further with all the other people that are collaborating to it. I think we're accomplishing more working with the amazing community that's out there than we could on our own. And that's a sincere answer. I think the next thing to say is part of the reason I find the approach that Vox and others are taking to proprietary platforms a bit silly is because I haven't found that thing. Right? I haven't found that thing with how extensible WordPress is, with the contributions we make where it has flaws to make it better. I haven't found that thing, at least for a content management and publishing centric solution where WordPress isn't able to do it. Can we argue around superficial edges about whether it's nicer to have the page screen not need to reload as opposed to Ajax? Yeah, sure, but ultimately those things are superficial, right? In terms of like what matters, which is delivering a good experience for the people writing content, delivering a good experience for the people consuming the website, I can honestly say that I have not come across a place where I've said WordPress fundamentally can't even begin to do that. right? We need to fork it.
Mm.
To the broader question of, I guess what we're saying here, right, is, if the owners of the WordPress open source project, right, and another 100-pound gorillas, right, like an automatic in the room, somehow became evil, quote unquote, could the community, would 10up, and I think many other players in this space, could be band together? Could WordPress or some variation of WordPress survive without automatic, right, in the traditional largest contributors now? I think yes, right? I think if for some reason automatic were to disappear off the face of the planet, right, and contributors that work for WordPress, I think the community that's out there, including 10up and others, could make this product continue to be successful. And I think that's, by the way, I think that's a huge win for WordPress. Something to be very excited about.
Yeah, I totally agree. So now that you have recently launched Push Up and you had the taste into this with SEO slides, a while back we had a special Matt report with you and Chris Lemma. We talked about sort of does business track belong in WordCamps.
Yep.
Has your tune sort of changed a bit now that you're into two sort of formally launched products?
It's a fair question. I don't think it has. I haven't really thought about it a lot recently, to be honest. I think, and I do think it's easy to walk away, like for those of us that really pay a lot of attention, to this community, probably more than is healthy sometimes, right? It's easy to walk away, I think, with a simplistic takeaway of, like Chris is for business in the WordPress community and Jake is against it, which was never the point, right? Like I do still think, I've seen you give great talks like at Providence and elsewhere, right? I do think that there is a place for some business talks, right, at a WordCamp. My aversion, right, to the idea that there's an entire track, right, that's about business, I think those tent poles, I think, remain, right?
Yeah. Speaking of WordCamps, as I forgot to mention at the top of the show, WordCamp Miami is going on, and because I don't have the notes in front of me, it's sometime in May. I think it's May 9th, 10th, and 11th, as I was supposed to promote it. But being the A+, Colbert Report person that I'm supposed to be, I forgot to mention it. So this show is sponsored by WordCamp Miami, May 9th through the 11th, 2014, down at the University of Miami. I will be there speaking on the podcast panel with a couple other folks that are running podcasts, and I will be doing a talk in that business track on Sunday. Folks joining me on the podcast panel: Dradcast, WordPress Weekly, WP Gurley Show, Apply Filters, and of course myself representing the Matt Report. So, folks, it's going to be an amazing event. Go ahead and check out the link right below the live chat. And if you're not on the live show today, you're listening to this in a recording, it'll be in the show notes of this post. So back to where our hero was.
That's an awesome camp, by the way.
Yeah.
David and that team does a great job. Our director of engineering, John Jacoby, will be there speaking.
Nice. Celebrating their 5th year, which is amazing. Yep. So now back to, you've launched the two products, up to 60 folks working for you. Is there a unique difference? And this is one of the sort of arguments that I've heard you say before, is there's no real difference between a WordPress business and a business. But now that you've got these two products out there, are you seeing some kind of difference in the WordPress business, like the market, the importance of making connections in the community, the sustainability of selling a plugin?
So let me answer. So I'm trying to think how to best answer that question. The point of saying a WordPress business is no different than any other business is not to say that there's not, as there is in any marketplace or niche or community, right, that it doesn't have its own special, characteristics, right, nuances. The point is that those characteristics and nuances aren't unique to WordPress. They're unique to any niche, any very narrow vertical or even broad vertical has its own characteristics, right? Like what product, what marketplace is out there that doesn't have its own special properties? Right now, we're about to start doing work for like a very large international like seed company, planting company. Like you can bet, like in conversations with them, like there's all sorts of things about like how their community of growers will respond, how their competitors respond, the importance of their network, the peculiarities of selling that product. So every industry, including WordPress, yeah, I mean, the connections, how you sell it, understanding what it means for part of it to be open source, it has its quirks, but the fundamental business of, what's a profit, right? How do you market? What percentage of your revenue should you reinvest in marketing, right? How do you build a team? How do you find this at the back end from my perspective, is not different.
Now, speaking of like that same client that you're talking about, is there one thing that we're sort of just jaded by in this WordPress business world? Be it the seven-figure theme clubs that we see being tossed around. I think you kind of hinted at it before, but what is it that we're just have our blinders onto, or something that we're jaded by, that we're getting drawn to the light like mosquitoes to a to a light?
Well, I mean, I think there's a good side and a bad side to that, right? Like the good side, the good part of it is that there is a lot of opportunity for the independent entrepreneur, right? This is truly, I've probably heard me make the joke before that I think there's this in babysitting left, right? For true, competition. I mean, you don't to be paid to make a website, you have to do one thing, which is convince the person paying for it that you can do it. There's no certification that says government approves and allows that I can make websites. You need to pay for what, a $500 computer to get started, right? At best, I mean, the barriers to entry, the requirements, it's as close to an unregulated, right, truly open marketplace, right, like as there is, right, out there as a space. You can contract somebody if you want next door. You can contract somebody, overseas, right, at discount, labor rates. So I think that's very exciting in the sense that you can come from nowhere and be very scrappy and build yourself up and climb up the ladder, right, and prove yourself. And I think that's very compelling to a certain kind of entrepreneur. Probably one that also values things like open source, that has a more of a meritocracy-based system and more transparency and openness as a system. I think the flip side of it, I think that the negative thing we have to be careful about in the WordPress community is that I do think, compared to other technology communities, we're particularly insular. Right, as a group. I think, Matt, you've done a great job of bringing in a lot of outside voices, right, into your podcast recently, and I love the fact that you brought in the kind of audience that listens and talks about WordPress. But the truth is, like, compared to other camps that I've been to, compared to other technology conferences, is we're a group that loves to talk to ourselves, right, more than any other, right? And I think that, when all you do is talk about when in the world of the internet we live in now, when you can hang out with a group of what seems like a ton of people, right, 5,000 to 15,000 people that love talking about WordPress all the time, you can, in a very human way, you can deceive yourself into thinking that that's all the people in the world, right, when in fact it's not, right? It's a very passionate group.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's actually one of my questions when we jump into the WordPress community stuff. Talking about how we just talk to each other. But before we get there, is that the underlying problem with the perception of WordPress, because it is somebody who can pick up a $500 laptop and just start hitting the streets and start putting things together? Is that devaluing what we do from the higher end when we go into the $100,000 or even $50,000 to $100,000 project and beyond? Is that sort of what's holding us back? Today?
I really don't think so. I mean, if there's a truth in that, right, it's that what does hold us back is when people don't do a good job, right, and they reinforce through, simple headlines that don't tell the whole truth, right, about WordPress sites being hacked. But that's a risk, right? But I mean, to me, that's like saying the fact that there's a $179 iPod Shuffle, right, does that devalue enterprises' desire to buy $2,500 Mac Pros, right, and devalue their desire to buy expensive iPhones for all their employees? No. In fact, I think it's very much the opposite, right? Like, I think WordPress's broad appeal to consumer tastes infiltrates right at the top. I think the fact that there is a ladder to climb, that somebody that doesn't have a lot of money can start with WordPress and grow up with WordPress, right, actually is how WordPress has succeeded. I mean, WordPress didn't get to the point that it's at today because somebody was going in and selling it, right, the way Adobe does in large enterprises. It got there because slowly but surely more people were using it, more people realized it was compelling, right, more people enjoyed the experience of using it, and that those tastes infiltrate, right?
Another question that I don't have on the sheet, but something that just sprung up. I forget. I think it was Jeff Rowe's podcast where I heard Matt talk about Squarespace pulling Squarespace pulling an advertisement for the Super Bowl. So dropping whatever it costs, I don't know, $2, $3, $4 million to run an ad during a Super Bowl, to broaden the awareness. And it was sort of like take a step back, like, wow, I mean, should WordPress, should Automatic, should Matt pull an ad like that to spread awareness? Will we ever see that kind of awareness being spread to the consumer level for WordPress? And you, as such a valued partner with Automatic, when you look in their direction, what do you say? Hey guys, how can you spread awareness? Or are you happy with the amount of awareness in the enterprise level and the clients that you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, first, by the way, great questions. You're definitely making me think. So, the question that's going through my head, right, is WordPress a consumer product? Is that where it needs to be marketed, right? At this point, WordPress.com is a consumer product, right? If Matt wants WordPress.com to be a very strong continued competitor to something like Squarespace, then yes, something like a major ad buy on a non-technology. I mean, I don't know how many technology geeks and website buyers are watching the Super Bowl. Projecting purely from my own clear sports fanmanship.
You had chicken wings and hot dogs,
right?
Wrapped
somewhere
around.
Else, not watching the show, but in the spirit of it.
Yeah.
So WordPress.com. Yes, right. If WordPress.com is the place that they want to get people in and build awareness around WordPress, which is an Automatic product, right? That's where something like a Super Bowl ad comes in. For our business, I don't really think of WordPress as a consumer product. I don't know really what a Super Bowl ad really buys, right, as a return on investment, right? Where we do as a community, where I think Automatic is and can continue to contribute, and I think where we can team up as agencies and businesses, right, across the spectrum in WordPress, is I do think we can make more effort to infiltrate a sales process into large enterprise and large business, right? I think we count too much on those consumer tastes, right, on those low-level tastes, and just good word of mouth and referrals, right? Like I'd like to see more enterprise teams, and not just one company owning it, right, but something like our open source model that's a little bit more independent, right? Or not non-partisan but bipartisan, right? Like go into and sell into large companies. So not approach like a Price Waterhouse or something from the perspective of come buy Matt's services or Jake's services, but to approach them to say, I want to talk about WordPress, I want to talk about open source platforms, I want to talk about how you use content management strategy and build those relationships. That's something that Acquia has done very well over the last few years that I think has had an impact. It's something that Adobe does extremely well and spends a lot of money on. To me, if we were to spend money and team up and think more about overtly advertising, at least for our interests, that's a lot more interesting to me than like blitzing consumers. I mean, do you think more business comes to you as a website consultancy from consumers being more interested, a guy watching the Super Bowl being more interested in WordPress?
No.
Yeah, it's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's somebody that was going around every single state and running WordPress workshops for businesses and
right.
Holding business and enterprise dinners,
right,
that probably would have a real impact.
Right. Yeah, and let me just give sort of the context of why I ask these types of questions for folks that don't know. We used to run, we being my family, my father co-founded my studio with, we used to run dealerships at the local community level. General Motors, and it was Mazda, then it was General Motors, Chevy, Cadillac, GMC, Pontiac, Buick, all that stuff. And then we sold out, I don't know, however many years ago I started this business, 5 years ago, sold out of the business before GM went bankrupt. So I've seen firsthand the mothership go from a brand of a century, right? General Motors started out with a real mission to help people get a vehicle and like to get to their job, to make a living, to deliver stuff, right? For transportation, like when it really meant something back then. To fast forward 100 years where it's just push metal, come out with a product, be profitable. And we've seen it to the level where the big brand is saying, these cars are great. You have to go out there and sell these. Why aren't you selling these cars? And then on the ground, with the boots on the ground, these cars are falling apart. They're very bland in design. They're bloated, to use a tech term. To then watching the company go bankrupt, and then also having your own competitors in your own region or market band together for marketing dollars for the greater good of all of you. I mean, you're all competing, but you're banding together to do marketing because General Motors or the bigger brand isn't really supporting you the way they should. So that's sort of where these crazy things come up. I know some folks don't like it because it sounds a little too like Matt's against WordPress. Well, if not, I'm just always questioning the machine.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great. I mean,
right.
I'm glad somebody else is questioning the machine.
Right.
I think we can learn a lot from those models, right? The biggest growth that we can still have as companies providing agency services and products, the biggest growth we can have by far, right, is growing the marketplace, right, together for interest, right, compared to all fighting over, scraping over, right, the customers that want to use WordPress, which is a lot, right, but compared to that, the power of actually growing, right, investing in growing the interest and the adoption, there's a lot of work to go around for our community.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's jump into the community. I'm going to pull two questions for the interest of time from my community section. You mentioned that WordPress podcasts, media shows, potentially news sites, we're all just talking to each other in what we think is this, huge world, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of scenario where we're just down here and everything looks gigantic. I'm just going to drop the mic, but what do you think about what should we be doing as podcasters, as mediapreneurs in this space to broaden the horizons of folks, if anything, if we can do anything?
If you can do anything is a good question. I mean, I think the lowest hanging fruit, right, is invite other people into the conversation, right? I think I'd rather listen to a podcast, right, that invites people that whose perspectives I've never heard, that aren't coming from this inside perspective on WordPress, that maybe don't even get entirely what WordPress is. I'd love to hear more of those perspectives, right? I'd like to invite more feedback, right, and outside voices. I'd like to hear the stories of people that don't like me and like to get on shows and toot their horn, right? And their company's horn. I think we need to broaden, right? We need to broaden the number of people that we invite in, to tell stories. I think there's a fair question. This is where I stop and trip over my words because I don't want to be. I'm trying to teeter a balance here between giving useful feedback for our community and just being being a peanut gallery. There's probably some people in our community that like being a big fish in a small pond, right? And I think for that element of our community, I don't know that there's something that just podcasters and media can do, except to maybe pierce, right, that idea. I mean, I'm love being in this community. There's no but at the end of the sentence, by the way. I'm flattered, right, by the attention and interest people have in how 10up do. I will also say that having worked in government contracting, where a 100-person company is a cute little small startup, right, that I hope that I also have a certain if anybody believes this, but a certain humility, right, to what's possible, right, and what big, right, really is. I don't consider 10up to be a big company. I consider it bigger than what a lot of people that sort of involve themselves in our community are doing, right? But I mean, most of our customers, they could chop the entire size of our company off of them. They wouldn't even notice it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you mentioned this before somewhere else. I think a lot of folks, like you say, I think you chuckle and say, well, I do work for small business. Well, in your experience, small business is what? What's the legal legal term for small business? Up to 30,
do you know what the government defines as a small business as?
34 million, right, in revenue?
Right, in revenue. And people-wise, do you know what they define it as?
Up to 100?
I think it's 199 now.
199. Yeah. So I mean, it's like a lot of
Automatic just passed the bar recently. Yeah. For small business.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of us, and it's sort of the same kind of thing. We're looking around. We think 1,000, 5,000, 15,000 people is the entire universe of WordPress, but it isn't. Same thing. We say small business. A lot of us mean micro business, right? I mean, we're folks that are building out the $1,500 to $2,500 site is a lot of them are for a micro business.
If you want to understand this in the extreme, right, go find a rabid political community, right, on the internet, right, of any stripe, right? It doesn't have to be left, right. It can be, for a specific interest group, and go down the rabbit hole, right, like into their communities, and there are thousands of people there that are all talking to themselves, right, that are convinced that don't, and you come in as this outsider, and it's like, right, it's like, you wonder, do these people get out? Right? Because people know there's another point of view. I mean, the internet is the internet can be phenomenal, right? And shows like yours can be phenomenal and can be, can change everything, right? Because you have the power to invite in all kinds of voices that without a tool like this you might otherwise hear from. One of the dangerous things about the internet, though, is conversely, you can find the thousands of other people, you can find what could even be a small minority, right, of other people that all share your opinion, right, and reinforce your opinion, in ways that wasn't as feasible before. So I would encourage us to be the former, right? To use the internet, to use our medium, to invite in different ideas, not just hang out with the crowd that feels cozy.
Yeah. One of the last questions here for the community and for the more formal interview, sort of on the back of what we were already talking about, but in terms of events, that WordPress sort of sponsors and WordPress Foundation, WordCamps specifically. We've seen the introduction of Pressnomics and a few other sort of micro ones pop up. I think I heard WooCommerce is going to be doing one. I think you might have alluded to a 10UpCon happening pretty soon in North America. Just kidding, but maybe. So should WordPress be doing different events, under the brand, something different than a WordCamp, or do we leave it up to the community to come up with these new events to spur this innovation?
Good question. I don't know of a plan for 10UpCon, although maybe I should be writing this down. I do think there are opportunities from other conferences. I don't think we should expect that Automatic, is the only company that can bring new ideas and big ideas. I think that there is a big marketplace for conferences that approach beginners, small businesses, right, to help them build their sites. I also don't think it has to start as a centralized, right, I'm going to conquer North America, right, or the world effort, right? I think, and I think not only can people get out there and run in their community or their city, it would be very well received, like WordPress how-to workshops, right, introduction to WordPress workshops. People have done that, right? That's actually not a new thing. I know probably off the top of my head 5-6 people that have done that in their communities, and by the way, had a lot of success at it, even even from a business model, and revenue-making standpoint.
Yeah. Well, it's been an amazing interview, Jake. We talked earlier, but we do want to get you back to talk a little bit more about the product specifically, and sort of the vision and the architect and all that fun stuff. But amazing advice for the agency, for the freelancer looking to grow and jump up to that next level. So can't thank you enough for that. And I'm sure that I can tell by the chat, and I can already hear and read the emails coming through and comments from folks enjoying it when this actually goes into the iTunes channel. Let's go into the last few segments of the show. We did get a listener question from the chat room that came through. They want to know what 10up means.
So 10up means what 10up means is finishing the last 10%. Really, what 10up's really about is the difference between good and great. Right, it's not just a little bit better; it's a lot better. We can play with it every which way. I think I'd like to take credit for it. I think someone on our team said, the good engineers do the get the first 90% of a project done. The great engineers get the last 10 up.
Yeah, nice.
That kind of idea.
Nice. Segment, what's in your toolbox? What app, be it like an Evernote or Gmail, some other SaaS app, do you use on a daily basis, maybe to manage your business or you specifically? And then is there one important app that 10up uses to get through the day? Besides WordPress, obviously.
Have you heard of WordPress? There's a few different tools. I always say I'm the guy that's actually, ironically for an engineer, never that excited about the tool talks. If there's one tool that I think all of us use all day long that's become essential to our workflow, I'll plug HipChat, the distributed communication tool. I think it's really enabled us to have an effective virtual workplace, having one-on-one meetings and private rooms and water cooler rooms and project rooms. It's really been it's become a big part of our day-to-day.
Yeah. I started looking at HipChat as well. It is pretty amazing. So are you finally off of IRC, or are you still using
Yes.
that? Okay.
No, we have gone away from the open IRC.
Nice. Now you can actually pull it up on your phone or your tablet or something like that.
Yep.
We're going to jump into the lightning round. I'm going to ask you a series of quick questions, and you will have a series of quick answers.
Now that I'm wiped out right from the hard questions. Fast.
Yeah, this stuff is
now
easy.
throw the fast stuff on me.
Yeah, this is the last 10%, Jake. This is what you're good at.
Right. Better not let you down.
The number one plugin that you cannot live without besides your own.
Can't count any of our own, huh? I actually don't have a great answer off my head. We don't use a lot of other plugins. I mean, some of the Google Analytics plugins, right, are great ones that add XML sitemaps. Okay, I'll give you this one. 4 strong passwords or limited login attempts.
Nice. What's a favorite WordPress or business book?
I read widely. I'll give you 2 different. I don't have a favorite WordPress book, to be honest. I mean, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is always a classic. I haven't read it, in a number of years again, but that's always, I think, one of my favorites. Sort of a classic to stand by.
Are you ever going to publish a WordPress book?
Maybe someday in a world where I have more time.
Yeah.
I'd like to publish another blog post.
Yes, please.
It'll take me 3 lifetimes to write
I don't know why I didn't have that worked in there. Damn.
Yeah.
What's a quote that you live or run your business by?
You want it bad, you get it bad.
This is the best business or career advice you ever received from someone.
Best business. That's a good question. I feel like it's not one I can answer right off the top of my head.
On a yes or no answer, you have mentors, right, and advisors that you, and that is super important. As what you mentioned at the top of the show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a one-liner, right?
Yeah.
Like I can tell you that like the conversations that we have, like the dialogue that we've had. I think that dialogue early on about sort of the finance of business was very eye-opening to me. A mentor that I had which I've talked at several venues about, talked a lot about recruiting and the importance of always looking for new people and hiring new people. And
nice. Shameless plug, wpmentor.org. Everybody go and sign up. Find yourself a mentor. Sign yourself up as a mentor to help other people. What's the longest a client project has ever taken?
Well, I mean, we have ongoing sort of never-ending projects, right? We have ongoing maintenance where it's new work every month. So I guess is forever.
Infinite. You win. Yeah. 5 years was the longest running one that I heard so far. If you had to switch to another CMS, what would it be?
Good question. I mean, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have an obvious answer. I mean, I think the easiest answer would probably be something like a Drupal, simply because beyond WordPress, I genuinely value open source. Platforms and technology, I don't know that there's another very mature open source CMS alternative that I could look to.
Nice. Who should I interview next?
Good question. I'm trying to think of who you maybe haven't talked to. I think I would love for somebody, I don't actually know the name of the people, but I'd love for somebody to try to get a hold of the people at data.gov that did that migration, right, and get some insight from them into how that process went in the decision making. I think I'd love to hear more from some like Yuri and some of the guys at the New York Times about everything that they're doing with WordPress over there.
Just a quick note, I actually reached out to somebody from the Massachusetts department, and they never got back to me because I wanted to talk to them about at least the expansion of data for the state of Massachusetts. I figured it'd be easier for me to land that interview than it was at the federal level, so I'll try again. What's the one question I didn't ask you that I should have?
I don't know. I think you were so comprehensive. I can't even think of one, Matt.
Awesome. Well, Jake, amazing interview. Awesome stuff that we talked about. If I said it again, I'll say it again. We'll get another show in so we can talk specifically about the products. We'll give PushUp a little bit more time to mature in the marketplace, and you can come back and give us some of your insights that you've and experiences that you went through launching the product. That said, tell everybody where they can find this new product and where they can find you on the web.
Thank you for that. I was wondering where I was going to be able to sneak the plug-in, right? So, so the specific product is PushUp. It's pushupnotifications.com. And what it does, starting with a great implementation baked into OS X Mavericks on Mac, the newest version of their operating system, it makes it extremely simple and easy and reliable to deliver desktop push notifications. So if you have a popular client that has a news blog, if you have an intranet for your internal customers that you push news to, if you have just a personal site that your friends and family follow but they don't want to reload your site every day, it makes it extremely easy to deliver news to them right to their desktop, even when their browser is closed. It's normally a $14.99 setup fee, which gives you up to 100 unique notifications for life, and then completely pay-as-you-grow pricing, depending on how much you choose to use it and how much engagement that you get. We have on the 10up site, we have a promo code in there that takes that setup fee down to just 99 cents. It's thanks 10up. I think we still have at least a handful left on the promo.
Nice.
So check it out.
Yeah,
and then, of course, 10up.com is our core business.
And your blog?
JakeGoldman.me. You can read my posts from 3 months ago.
Yeah, where you post annually.
Now that we've gotten the product, this product out, maybe I'll have a little bit more time.
So let's just tease this business talk about PushUp. When I saw that launch, because I don't have any of this stuff prepared. with just an evil grin, what is the business? Is it selling the product in the push notification seats, for lack of a better word, or is it the data for the publishing companies?
What literally are we selling?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the product, are you more excited for the revenue you get from installing the plugin client-side service, or is it the data that you can sell to publishers in the back end?
I think the analytics are useful to them, but I don't think our analytics are meaningful without the feature. So I truly believe that the actual feature itself is the core of what we're selling. I think good analytic data that we provide, good insights into how people are going to be used, justify the cost. Right, but this isn't like a Google Analytics replacement, right? It's not going to give them suddenly a much deeper level of data analysis on their site than they're probably getting from other sources like Omniture. I really do believe it's not just fluff, that when we look at the future of publishing, right, whether it's on mobile or starting with desktop, and by the way, I would be shocked if Apple doesn't introduce website-based push notifications in iOS 8, right? I think they were just testing the waters for volume and usage, starting it on Mavericks. The idea of delivering for the sites that you most love, right, or think social networks or forums, delivering on demand from websites without having to install an app, right, locally, notifications, I think is the future, right? Like the idea that I open up some feed reader that strips out all the context, right, and all the ads and malformats their images, right? The idea that that's the future, the idea that going and clicking reload across 10 tabs every day, right, that's not the future, right? The future is the sites and the news you most care about, selectively curated by those publishers, is going to come right to your devices. And we want to provide those solutions to some of our biggest customers. It's already running on sites like GigaOM and 9to5Mac. We have other large customers that'll be rolling it out. We want to be able to really provide this answer to getting to the future as we do across our services to our customers and to everybody else who wants to get in on it.
And Steve Jobs said there'd never be a 7-inch iPad too, but hey, you might get you might get into the
8-inch.
Oh yeah, an 8-inch. Sorry, you might get into the data game one day. But that's awesome stuff, Jake.
Yeah.
Can't wait to sit down and talk to you about that. Everybody, thanks for joining. If you want to learn how to grow your business, connect with other awesome WordPress entrepreneurs, it's mattreport.com/join. Check that out to join an awesome community with awesome folks like Jason, Lisa, Pam, all sorts of new people, new faces every day. If you want to just support the site, share it, tell folks, mattreport.com/subscribe to join the mailing list. Thanks, everybody.